I guess we're recording. Um, hey kids. I'm Chauncey. I'm Matt's roommate. I just wanted to give you, like a little spiritual reading over here. So, while Matt's away, I just thought I'd start the class for you guys. So, hope you did the reading for last week. Let's just start with a little meditation, if we will. If you could bow your heads, please. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for battle, my fingers for war. And then Captain America said, I don't need my fingers because I have an awesome shield. And he punched Iron Man in the face. Look at this, man. Look at that. That's so cool.
What the heck are you doing?
What? I'm just.
Dude, you're in my stuff.
Um,
This is my sanctuary where I come and I prepare my students to learn about God. And now you're here. What is. This isn't.
it's scripture.
This is Mitchell's Comics.
And?
Okay, and you're eating a cinnamon roll on camera?
Well, yeah.
Dude, be professional.
What?
Eat an egg or something, like something more sophisticated.
I don't understand what's wrong with
Okay, all
this.
right. I need to get to class. All right, you need to.
Can I teach your kids still?
No, you need to. Come on, dude. Yeah, this is pretty good actually. Hello, 8th grade. These are your notes on the Renaissance, and this is really a time period that takes place right at the end of the medieval church. It's really a big transition out of the medieval church into a new era of the church, and we kind of give it this name called the Renaissance. The Renaissance comes from a Latin word renasci, meaning born again, and eventually was turned into a French word, renaissance, meaning rebirth. It really started out of an intellectual movement and desire to increase the arts, literature, all of those things, a rebirth, and all of that. And it started with this movement we like to call the humanities, and we call it the humanities because these great artists and these great intellectual figures through the Renaissance, they believed that through practicing what they called the humanities, they would be able to form themselves into the perfect human being. And how did they do that? Through what we like to call the classics. Okay, the classics. Intellectual movement that put a strong emphasis on studying the classics. And the classics are, we've got a few things here. You might say something that's classic, and you guys might use this term all the time. We call something classic. It's the first. It's the original. It is the model for other things. And when you think of the classics, I want you to think of the Greeks and the Romans. Okay, the Greeks and the Romans, culturally in history, really laid the groundwork, and you might say set the model for how literature, how art, culture, politics, all of those things ought to be done. And the Renaissance was this intellectual movement that sought to return back to that, to study Greek literature and Roman literature and all of the things and ideas that came with it, and also a resurgence in classical Latin, or in the studying of the Greek language as well, during this time. One thing that we've talked about is Dante's Divine Comedy. His work, the Divine Comedy, you might say, was really the beginning, one of the first works that really set the Renaissance movement on its course. So that's just a little bit about the Renaissance itself and some of the things that they valued during the Renaissance. You also had pagan versus Christian humanism again. There were some people, just as there is in any age throughout history of the church, you had some people who were dead set on let's just study the Greeks and the Romans. We don't want anything to do with Christianity. We're going to break away. We're just going to study, Latin, Greek, and all of their literature for its own sake and not really try to relate it to Christianity. But then you had many famous Christians, such as Dante, who really valued trying to reconcile these ancient classical ideas with Christian thought. And so that was very characteristic of this age of the Renaissance in the church. So let's talk about the Renaissance and the papacy, okay? Because there's a lot of things going on here in the papacy and in church politics that are really important as we leave the Middle Ages. And we have these popes, there's about 10 of them that we consider to be the Renaissance popes, from Nicholas V, and he reigned as pope from 1447 to 1455, all the way to Leo X, who reigned from 1513 to 1521. What was characteristic of these popes is they were usually huge advocates for the arts and the classics, which we've just seen is characteristic of the Renaissance. But they also tended to be very political, because they realized they had to rule and defend the Papal States. And the Papal States, we haven't learned much about them this year, but the Papal States were essentially a group of Italian territories given to the Pope hundreds of years ago. Plenty of political stuff with them. But during this period of time specifically, the popes found themselves defending, growing, conquering, establishing themselves as a powerful force in Italy. And so that was often characteristic of the Renaissance popes. Is they went to war, they were military popes, they weren't always the best priests, but they did focus on ruling and defending the Papal States. One strategy during this political time, during the Renaissance popes, one strategy was to surround themselves with family members for support and protection. And this led to another abuse in the church. And we've talked about abuses in the church this year, such as Caesaropapism, lay investiture, simony. This strategy led to something called nepotism. It became a big problem, and it was essentially this act of popes passing on the papacy to family members, similar to a monarchy. And that led to many issues in the church at this time. And a lot of people were frustrated with it as well. But let's look at some of the popes, the Renaissance popes. The first one, Nicholas V, who again from 1447 to 1455, he was very humanist. Okay, so he loved the arts. He founded a Vatican library. He planned to rebuild St. Peter's Basilica, and he loved finding ancient manuscripts. And that was a huge, just all the arts and focusing on those types of things were big for Nicholas V. Between him and this next one we'll talk about, the next few popes didn't really care much about humanism. But later down the road, you have Sixtus IV, who was pope from 1471 to 1484. And he built the famous Sistine Chapel, which is a beautiful chapel in Rome in the Papal Palace. And later on, we'll see that a famous painter that you guys have probably heard of, Michelangelo, he's famous for painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. But one of the issues with Sixtus IV here is he set things up for a really bad successor to the papacy. He essentially appointed many cardinals who were corrupt, and they in turn elected a very corrupt pope after him. And this guy is Alexander VI. And right around here, my touchscreen for some reason went bad, so I tried to write bad news here, but then I ended up having to type it. So Alexander VI, he is bad news. Had a lot of bad things going on with him and the papacy. He fathered a child. There were many scandals. He also persecuted this guy named Girolamo Savonarola, a famous Dominican preacher that many people found to be very holy. He persecuted him. So not a good time for the papacy here with Alexander VI, which really, again, hurt the papacy. As people begin to become more frustrated with abuses in the church, it's not a good time for someone like Alexander VI. A few years down the road after him, you have a Pope, Julius II. He was a great leader, but not a great priest. He was an avid supporter of the arts, though, and he was the one who later on commissioned Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Now, all of this, this time, again, the Renaissance was a great time of resurgence in the arts, of literature. It was a good intellectual time for the church. A lot of great painting, sculptures, architecture came out of the Renaissance. However, because the popes were putting more of an emphasis on, again, things like the arts, as well as political gains. You basically have a time of many abuses where church reform continued to be put off in order for popes to run after their political endeavors. There were many people upset with corruption in the church, and her neglect towards those issues created the perfect environment for what was about to happen, the Protestant Reformation. And we'll talk more about the Protestant Reformation this week. Let me know if you guys have questions about the Renaissance. Hope this was helpful. Talk to you guys later. Bye.